Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mark Rotenberg. I am president of the Electronic Privacy Information Center. EPIC is a nonprofit research organization based in Washington, D.C. We are pleased to welcome you to this afternoon press conference that is being held at the Fund for Constitutional Government on Capitol Hill in Washington. The theme of our press conference this afternoon is to talk about Facebook, the Federal Trade Commission, and a 2011 consent order. We have with us several important speakers from the consumer advocacy community, who I will introduce in a moment. I'd like to say, first of all, just a few words about the reason that EPIC is organizing this press conference today. Back in 2009, EPIC and a group of consumer privacy organizations, including the U.S. Public Interest Research Group, went to the Federal Trade Commission and explained to the FTC that Facebook was engaged in business practices that were threatening the privacy of American consumers, stifling innovation, and also competition. And we urged the Federal Trade Commission to take action against Facebook back in 2009. Over the following 2 years, we continued to petition and to campaign to the FTC to get them to act. We testified in Congress and we organized public events. And finally, in 2011, the FTC announced a consent order against Facebook, in which the FTC promised that the company's violations of consumer privacy would come to an end. The FTC chairman at the time described the consent order as a sweeping mandate to protect American consumers. In the 8 years since the consent order was announced by the FTC, the Commission has not taken a single action against Facebook. Not one. Last year, on March 26th, following the reporting of the Cambridge Analytica breach, which raised questions about the 2016 election in the United States and the Brexit vote in the UK, the FTC announced that it was finally reopening the investigation of Facebook. That was March 26, 2018. We are here now, almost a year later, with no announcement from the FTC, no report, no fine, no change in Facebook's business practices. And so our press conference today looks at the need for the FTC to take action against Facebook, to enforce the order, which is the basis now of an internet campaign to tell the FTC 1 year is enough time to complete an investigation. We have been joined in this effort by many distinguished members of Congress. Senator Blumenthal has said that Facebook violated the consent order. Senator Hawley has said that Facebook violated the consent order. The former FTC chair, Kovacic, said that Facebook violated the consent order. The former chief technology officer for the FTC, Ashkan Soltani, said that Facebook violated the consent order. And today, Representative Cicilline, who chairs the House subcommittee responsible for antitrust oversight, has called for an investigation of Facebook's violations of US antitrust law. Everyone is looking now at the Federal Trade Commission to see what will happen next. And to give them direction and insight as to what they should do, we have 4 expert panelists who it is my pleasure to introduce now. Our first speaker, one of the leading consumer advocates in the United States, Ed Mierzwinski with the U.S. Public Interest Research Group. Ed.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to EPIC for leading the charge against Facebook and in criticism of the Federal Trade Commission. USPIRG is the National Federation of State Public Interest Research Groups. and we take on powerful interests on behalf of our members around the country. We've been involved in the privacy fight along with Epic, alongside Epic and other leading organizations, including Public Citizen, for many, many years. In fact, I would say that the Federal Trade Commission's failures go well before Facebook was even invented in a dorm room. And I look first to the credit bureaus, which the Federal Trade Commission was in charge of regulating since 1970, when the Fair Credit Reporting Act was passed, until 2011, when the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau took over authority for the largest credit bureaus and also gained rulemaking authority over all of the credit bureaus. Over the 40 years, 70 to 2011, that the Federal Trade Commission enforced the FCRA against the big three credit bureaus, and they are Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. You might have heard of Equifax. It's kind of in the news, along with Wells Fargo, and Facebook as kind of the big three poster children for what's wrong with Washington. So over that 40 years, there was only one time that the three credit bureaus were called to task for violating the law, and that the Fair Credit Reporting Act in 1999, was amended in 1996 to require the credit bureaus to have a reasonable number of people to answer the phone when consumers called with complaints. So they were each fined a combined total of $2.5 million. That's the only time the big three credit bureaus were ever fined, and the credit bureaus ran amok for 40 years. But then that gets us to one of those credit bureaus. Equifax is another failure of the FTC. It has enforced the data security rules under the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act since 1999, and it has a so-called safeguards rule that supposedly requires all companies, including the credit bureaus that are regulated under the GLBA, to have reasonable protections for data security. We all know that story. And what has happened? The FTC still has not acted on the Equifax breach, which affected over 148 million people, where the bad guys basically reached into their computers and swam around in there for months before the company Equifax did anything, and we're still waiting on the Federal Trade Commission. In terms of Bureau of Competition, the antitrust arm of the FTC, which shares antitrust with the Department of Justice, we look to, and I think my other colleagues will talk more about this, we look to the way that Facebook got big. Did Facebook get big by being better? No, it got big by acquiring erstwhile competitors. Instagram, acquired by Facebook, was at the time a big and leading competitor ahead of Facebook in some ways. WhatsApp could have been a leading competitor in messaging today, but instead it's become, under the Facebook name, just another messaging company. And we could go on and on about that one too. I just want to point out, what has the FTC been up to lately? The FTC has been navel gazing on antitrust and looking at the platforms and what to do about them. Since last fall, it has been holding an interminable series of public hearings that are simply reinventing the Robert Bork antitrust paradox theory of consumer welfare adopted to prevent any strong antitrust enforcement in the 30 years since he wrote the book. So there are a few and far between have been the panelists who come up with new ideas at those hearings, but I don't think they're going to amount to much when you just simply say, round up the usual suspects of the FTC antitrust bar and of the FTC Alumni Association and of the FTC staff and have them talk to each other. There have been at least 25 days, I think, of these hearings, and I don't think there'll be much to show for it. It's sad. So we're calling on the FTC to do more. I've tried to outline a few of their failures, and I want to turn it over to my fellow panelists to go on further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. We're going to talk in a moment about developments within the United States. but Burcu Kilik works with the Digital Rights Program of Public Citizen on the impact that US firms are having on people all around the world. And certainly there are a lot of concerns about the actions of Facebook and also questions about why the lead regulatory authority, the Federal Trade Commission, has failed to do anything. So you could speak to this.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for the introduction. As Mark mentioned, most of my work focuses on the global policy. So I travel around the world and I tell countries and the policymakers like how good is privacy, why countries need privacy, data protection. And most of the time the question I receive like, what do you do in the US? Like, you know, Facebook is based in the US. So what do you do for Facebook? And unfortunately, we don't have an answer. Like, you know, there is this FTC investigation going on for almost a year, and hopefully there will be an outcome soon. But to be honest, I don't have an answer. Like when people ask me that question, I'm like, yeah. So the thing is, like, this is an issue for the US, but this is an issue for most of the people, like the Facebook users. Like before coming here, I was checking some of the numbers just to figure out how many users Facebook has. Like, so as of like the end of 2018, Facebook has like 2.32 billion monthly active users, which means that more than like quarter of the world's 7 billion humans are active on Facebook. And if you add like 1 billion users on Instagram and 1.5 billion users on WhatsApp, you can see how big it is Facebook. You know, Facebook is a global giant. And countries with the most of Facebook users include India, United States, Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Turkey, and the UK. And the interesting thing is in most of these countries, Facebook means internet. Why? Because of the zero rating practices. Like all those years, Facebook tried really hard to ensure that it is the easiest and the cheapest application and cheapest way to connect to internet. And when you go to these countries and ask people like, you know, do you use internet? And they say, no, I use Facebook, because they don't know what is internet. You know, for them, Facebook is the internet and their only connection to internet is Facebook. So the question is like, Facebook has now access to more data than anyone else, maybe Google, and it's another discussion. And you know, all those years we said that, oh well, let's just leave it up to the companies, you know, self-regulation is good, they can do whatever they like, but we'll be fine. And Facebook had that scandals, like, and I was checking the Facebook scandals, like the first scandal was in 2006, you know, when Facebook had like Facebook was 2 years old and they had like 8 billion users. And since then, every day we wake up to a new scandal, you know, and there is no end, you know, it's just like there won't be any end to these scandals because the Facebook's business model is based on data exploitation. That's their business model. And there is nothing we can do. So there's no sector which has like billions of customers, like, because all these Facebook users should be considered as customers or the consumers, like that is unregulated as the big tech companies and as Facebook. So if you use like Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp, because I was on Facebook and after last year I said, okay, I'm quitting Facebook, but I use Instagram, I use WhatsApp. So it means that like I don't have much control over my data, and Facebook has control over like all the control over my data, and I have no idea how Facebook uses my data. So the billions of like Facebook users are looking for answers, like, so they need FTC to enforce this order. That this is like our only hope. Like, clearly the world is watching and they are waiting, and the stakes are very high. So this is FTC's chance to set a new global precedent for privacy and have to secure the rights of like those 2.32 billion users.
Great. Thank you very much, Burcu. I want to mention also that we are distributing here in Washington a lot of briefing material related to the consent order and Facebook. We include the original complaint from the consumer privacy groups. We include the announcement from the Federal Trade Commission back in 2011, a lot of the recent developments. Those materials are available online. if you look at the EPIC website, or if you search EPIC enforce the order, you'll find a lot of those materials that we're talking about today. I want to introduce now the FOIA Freedom of Information Act Council with EPIC, Enid Zhao. Enid has spent the last couple of years actually pursuing those biannual reports that Facebook was responsible for producing under the consent order, those reports which were supposed to provide the Federal Trade Commission with information about compliance. And I think she has some words to say about how well that process has worked.
Hi, thank you, Mark. So I'm here just to talk about how EPIC has been using the Freedom of Information Act to oversee FTC's enforcement of the consent order, since our complaints and the complaints of other consumer organizations had prompted the FTC to investigate Facebook in 2011. So EPIC had filed a FOIA request in 2013 for the Facebook's initial assessment and compliance report and initial audit required by the consent order. We received it, but it was heavily redacted. And last spring, in the wake of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, we also filed another FOIA request and also litigated and have filed a lawsuit against the FTC for not only the initial compliance reports and the first assessments, but also, like Mark mentioned, the other biannual assessments, which is 3 in total, and relevant communications between the agency and Facebook. And the commission released hundreds of pages of documents that relate to the commission's enforcement of the consent order, and they reprocessed the biannual audits and lifted some of the redactions, though it's still very heavily redacted, and released a lot of communications between the FTC and Facebook that really gives us insight into how the oversight and auditing compliance enforcement mechanism works between the commission and Facebook. And the communications reveal the FTC's failure to act on evidence that Facebook violated the consent order by not focusing on this evidence in its enforcement actions. Even when there was evidence of possible violations that's widely reported by Facebook, Facebook proactively provided some sort of indication that there might have been a violation, and also subsequent complaints by EPIC and other organizations. The FTC still did not take decisive action and use its specific legal authority to oversee Facebook. As a result of our litigation, we can see that the FTC did not make enforcement a priority. The documented communications that we received show a very amiable relationship between the FTC and Facebook. And throughout the years, the FTC never explicitly declared that any of Facebook's actions to be in violation of the consent order. The FTC often would provide very gentle reminders of their compliance obligations. If the FTC sought additional information from Facebook, Facebook would provide it, and then the FTC would often take it at face value and not have a sense of skepticism or ask more harder follow-up questions. And they often provided very timid feedback whenever Facebook would give them updates on its new product launches and anything like that. And also, based on the documents that we received, we realized that Facebook never informed the FTC of the Cambridge Analytica scandal in 2015. And also the 2017 assessments that were conducted by a third-party auditor, PricewaterhouseCoopers or PwC now, they erroneously certified that the Facebook's privacy controls were operating with sufficient effectiveness, when in fact Facebook knew about these issues surrounding the data collection of third-party app developers and never informed the FTC of the issue at the time. Even after the wake of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, we have communications of them talking about WhatsApp's updated privacy policies, but they've never had any kind of communications related to Cambridge Analytica. So while the FTC had released a lot of documents, a lot of the documents that we've received through our litigation has been redacted. And so we are continuing to aggressively pursue the full release of all the audits, as well as key segments of these communications so that there can be effective public oversight of the FTC. And we're continuing to use FOIA, not only in this litigation, but just to learn more information about how the FTC is enforcing it. So just last week, we filed 2 FOIA requests just to understand the number of consumer complaints that have been submitted to the FTC during the time of the consent order, and also whether they've had any investigative letters and communications, just to see how the agency has been, how the commission has been responding to consumer complaints so that we can effectively perform public oversight.
Great. Thank you, Enid. I'd like to highlight 2 points that you made, which I thought were particularly interesting. One is that in the report that was provided in 2017 by PricewaterhouseCoopers on behalf of Facebook to the FTC, they essentially said everything is going fine, no major concerns. This was after Cambridge Analytica and all the other investigations that were already underway in Britain and elsewhere. Facebook was reporting to the FTC, everything is fine, which is, I mean, just stunning, really, if you think about it for a moment. And then to your recent Freedom of Information Act request, there must be thousands of complaints against Facebook pending at the Federal Trade Commission from consumers across the country. This is not just the consumer groups here in Washington, D.C., but certainly a lot of people who have questions about why they end up in databases when they're not Facebook users, or how to opt out of facial recognition, all that stuff. Is there any indication that the Federal Trade Commission over the last 8 years has taken any enforcement action against Facebook?
They haven't taken, they haven't specifically said that Facebook was ever in violation, but if there was public evidence that shows a potential violation, the FTC has maybe inquired very briefly, very softly about these issues, but they've never really shown.
But there have been no fines.
There's
right?
been no fines. A lot of times they would communicate to Facebook saying that this might implicate the order, this might be a violation, you might have to change something, but they've never really said you are in violation.
Yeah, I mean, that's just incredible. Okay, and also we're very pleased to have with us today Christine Bannon. Christine is the EPIC Consumer Privacy Council, also leads the Privacy Coalition. She's been monitoring consumer privacy issues in the United States for some time, and has also looked closely at recent developments regarding Facebook, not only at the FTC, but elsewhere. And I thought you could tell us a bit about what you found.
So I'm going to talk about what the FTC should do and what it would really mean to enforce the order. So the FTC has many different remedies that are within its power, and the chairs of the FTC have consistently held out the Facebook order as an example of the agency's robust enforcement authority, both to Congress and to European regulators. And we're asking them now to keep that promise. Representative Cicilline, who's chairman of the House Subcommittee on Antitrust, had a New York Times op-ed today calling for an antitrust investigation into Facebook. And I just want to quote what he said. That how the commission chooses to respond to Facebook's repeated abuses will determine whether it is willing or able to promote competition and protect consumers. If the commission does conclude that Facebook has violated the consent order, how it fixes this problem through a legal remedy will be a test of its effectiveness. So the FTC should be seeking remedies that change the operation and incentives of the firm and are not a simple fine that can just be a cost of doing business for Facebook and would allow Facebook to continue business as usual. So fines receive the most attention, but are ultimately not the most effective way to change Facebook in a way that protects consumers. Facebook had more than $55 billion in revenue in 2018. So even a fine of a few $1 billion could just be a cost of doing business for the firm. In 2018, Facebook had a record number of privacy scandals and also record profits. So what's really needed are structural reforms and changes in business practices, not just fines that will get big headlines. So we're calling for the FTC to unwind the acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp. Those companies should be reestablished as independent entities and Facebook should be required to disgorge the personal data acquired from those firms. Facebook has announced that it intends to combine Facebook Messenger with WhatsApp and Instagram direct messaging to create a single messaging app. And this is going back on representations that it made to regulators and to the public when those mergers were being approved several years ago. And this shows the importance of the link between antitrust and privacy, and that competition and privacy are very closely linked, and that FTC should understand those remedies as supporting one another. The FTC should also require that Facebook comply with the fair information practices and bans on certain business practices that the company has repeatedly shown that it cannot do responsibly and that have been in violation of the order. And it should also reform its hiring and management practices. So part of the problem with Facebook arises with a company's failure to hire and maintain a diverse workforce. So we think that there should be independent directors who represent the interests of users and who also examine the civil rights impacts of Facebook's products and policies. Representative Cicilline has suggested removing members of the company's board or even top executives as another structural remedy to change Facebook. So Facebook's a repeat offender. Even after Cambridge Analytica, there have been several major privacy abuses that alone would warrant severe penalties and structural remedies to the company. And other countries have taken action in the past year and have been able to issue reports and fines. And now it's the FTC's time to take action and step up to protect consumers.
Great. Thank you very much, Christine. We are going to take some questions from folks in the room. I know we're also joined by people who are on Zoom, and I was going to suggest that if the people on Zoom would like to submit comments in the chat, we will be able to take your questions through the chat and then go ahead and ask our panelists. So also let me mention two related developments. One is that Epic is today launching a petition, which is at the Enforce the Order webpage for individuals who'd like to add their name to the growing list of people who believe that it's time for the Federal Trade Commission to act. If you go to Epic Enforce the Order, you'll be able to add your name to the petition. The other point I'd like to make is that next week, the Federal Trade Commission will hold 2 days of high-level meetings. And we have organized a rally in front of the FTC, March 25th and 26th. We'll be carrying the banner Enforce the Order. And our goal is to tell the FTC, as well as the state attorney generals, who will be here in Washington next week, that their first responsibility now on Facebook is to enforce that consent order. So if there are people who'd like to ask a question, do so in the chat. And I see we have some folks in the room, and I'll recognize you first.
Christine talked a little bit about an independent director for the company. I'm wondering where you guys would come down on something like Cicilline talked about getting rid of top executives, maybe Mark Zuckerberg himself, maybe Sheryl Sandberg, and structural leadership changes at the company from the FTC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's important to hold executives accountable, but at the same time to not have just certain big names take be scapegoats, and then to not have any structural changes in business practices. So I think just a few, firing a few people wouldn't be sufficient, but if there were significant changes to the corporate structure and leadership, and governance, that could be a significant remedy.
Great, thank you. We have quite a few people on Zoom. I suggested that if you wanted to put a question in chat, we could read it. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute and ask your question, we can make that work too. So I'm just looking to see if anyone does have a question. I'm going to put a question to Ed while we're waiting. One of the points that Representative Cicilline made in his op-ed today was that it's been about 2 decades since there's been meaningful antitrust enforcement in the United States, and there are a lot of criticisms that have been made in the past about antitrust. You don't always achieve your goals, and there are unintended consequences. But I have a sense today, Ed, that maybe the public mood is shifting on antitrust. Is that your view as well?
Well, I think that's certainly my view. It's being talked about in the presidential campaign sweepstakes, the Democratic challengers. Several of them are talking about this. There is Mr. Cicilline as a breath of fresh air on Capitol Hill, and he'll be doing a lot in that subcommittee. As I tried to make very clear, I think the FTC is a backwater on changing the mood, but they have got to get to the realization that the public wants change, that bigger isn't better, particularly if you got bigger not by being better, but by acquiring your competitors. They have not done a good job at the FTC, but I think the moods are definitely changing, and I think the public wants change. Monopoly, people are realizing that monopoly is a bad thing, that big companies are harmful not only to consumers, they're harmful to smaller competitors, and prices are not staying down because of these big companies. So it's time for a change, and I don't know how we bring the FTC forward except to keep talking to them about it.
Great, thank you, Ed. And maybe a question to Burcu. My sense also is that outside of the US, many of the regulators have become very impatient. I mean, you see action, for example, by the Information Commission Office in Britain. You see German antitrust authorities. I think you see increasingly in Latin America and Asia questions being raised by regulators and actions being taken. Do you anticipate there are going to be more actions by agencies outside of the US?
Yeah, I think there will be more actions because there is a demand, like everyone is like, every Facebook user is concerned. You go to Africa and you talk to people and they are concerned. I mean, although they have free access to Facebook and WhatsApp, and they ask the question, what happens to my data when it flows to the US? Because at the end of the day, data is flowing to the US, So like there is a demand on regulators and the policymakers, because there are more and more countries like considering GDPR style privacy rules now, and regulators want to do something because there is this demand. But the question is like they need a guidance. FTC decision will provide a guidance for those regulators, and if we get a symbolic fine, it won't be very supportive for those regulators to act, because the minute they act, they know that the US government will criticize them. Facebook will go to the US government, the trade representative, and tell them that, hey, these countries are fining me, or like they're introducing all these regulations. Look what I did. Like the FTC only fined me a couple of millions, let's say, or billions, but these regulators are not doing the same. So I mean, it will have consequences. That's why the FTC decision is important for the users here, but also the regulators outside of the US.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to go to Christine with a question. You were talking about WhatsApp and the hope that WhatsApp might be divested as part of an FTC settlement for enforcement of the consent order. Could you say a little bit more about what it represented in terms of user choice, when people could go for Messenger if that's what they wanted? That was the Facebook service, or they could go for WhatsApp if that's what they wanted, and that had strong privacy.
Mm-hmm. So WhatsApp really marketed itself as the privacy protective messaging app for consumers, and many consumers chose it for that reason. And that was really a big part of the company's mission. But when Facebook acquired it, there were certain representations made that things wouldn't be changed and that they wouldn't use the same monetization practices that they do for Messenger for WhatsApp. But over time, they've like chipped away at these promises and now are intending to merge the two services. So when you go from having a very protective privacy app to not even being able to choose among different services, I think that shows both the breakdown in our privacy regulators and in our antitrust regulators.
Some people have said recently that Mark Zuckerberg's announcement that he plans to integrate Messenger and WhatsApp and Instagram is actually an effort to preempt regulators who might try to break apart those components if there's an opportunity to do so. Do you think that's likely part of the thinking?
Yeah, I think that's likely true, to make it a lot more complicated to separate the two businesses from one another. And it's also just true that Facebook wants to be the single messaging platform in the US for US consumers, like WeChat is in China. They really want to be the only messaging app that users have. So I think it's dual purpose.
Great. Burcu?
Yeah, I want to comment on WhatsApp because WhatsApp case is very interesting. Like I've been following the WhatsApp since like 2011, like, and in 2012, WhatsApp said that they will never be they will never offer an ad on their platform, the founders of WhatsApp. And then back in 2016, Facebook bought WhatsApp and they gave us an option to opt out. They were saying that, oh, we are changing the terms of service and you have 1 month to opt out if you don't want WhatsApp to share your data with Facebook. And at that time, I tried to reach everyone I can, like, and I was like, guys, opt out, like, so we all opt out. And now, 3 years later, WhatsApp is saying to us, like, Facebook is telling us that, oh, by the way, we are going to merge the data, like WhatsApp and Facebook. So the interesting thing about WhatsApp, I told you, like in most of the countries, Facebook is internet. It's the same thing for WhatsApp. WhatsApp is 0 rated. So people have like free access to WhatsApp. People don't use phone. People use WhatsApp to communicate with each other. So we are not talking about social messaging service or social media application. We are talking about people's main way of communication. And think about the amount of data people share on WhatsApp. It is incredible that like suddenly one day they are like, yeah, you opted out and you build all your communications on WhatsApp because that's what I use, like to communicate with people all around the world. You know, I use WhatsApp, assuming that they will never share the data with Facebook because we opted out, right? But now they are changing the terms of service and we weren't given an option. No one asked me, like, I don't have an option. So what is my option? Like, leave WhatsApp and use another messaging service. But everyone I know is on WhatsApp because that's like how we build our contacts on WhatsApp. How it's gonna work? It's not gonna work. And what can we do? Nothing.
Okay, so thank you very much, Burcu. We're going to wrap up now. I did want to very much thank our panelists this afternoon for their comments, and thank also those folks who joined us online. As I said, a lot of material is available if you do a search on Enforce the Order. Also, that's hashtag Enforce the Order. You'll get a lot of information about the campaign. There will be a rally in front of the Federal Trade Commission next Monday and Tuesday, March 25th and 26th. But this is all really about a very simple point, which is that the FTC's failure to enforce the consent order against Facebook has created problems not only for privacy, but also for innovation and also for competition. And until the FTC acts, the risk to user choice and to robust innovation continues to be imperiled. And we very much hope the Commission will take the opportunity after 1 year has passed to enforce the legal authority that consumer organizations helped give the commission 10 years ago. It can't be another 8 years like this. Enforce the order, FTC.